Hi guys, this is Jennifer Steele again with part 2 of the topic 1 data task. So we're picking up here, we left off after question 14. And question 13 and 14 is where you were exploring the summary statistics drop-down menu just to see what it could do. And the example that I showed you for question 13 was summarize, how you would use the drop-down menu to summarize data. So I'm just going to go back to that for 1 second and show one more example of how you might handle question 13 and 14. So if I go back to my remote desktop and I go statistics, summaries, tables and tests, summaries, tables and tests, summary and descriptive statistics. This time, instead of doing summary statistics, which gives you the summarize command, I could do means, which are just averages. I'm going to do totals, which are sums, which sum up across rows. So this came up in office hours just a little while ago. And we're going to do the total command. And we want the total of COVID deaths across states, but we want it subdivided or disaggregated by race. So we're going to go model COVID death, COVID-DEATH, or you can do drop down COVID death. That can be twice, which we don't need. We can do code death and total death. But we're going to disaggregate by race. So we're going to click if in over, and we're going to select the race variable. Oops, we already selected it, so we don't need to select it twice. And then I'm going to add one, well, no, I'm not going to add that restriction yet. Okay, so I'm going to ignore the other tabs for now. We're just going to do COVID death and total death subdivided or disaggregated by race. And we're going to click submit, which means we'll keep this window, the dialog box open, but we will run the command. So when we run that command, we see a couple of things. We see the command that we just ran, which is total COVID death, tote death over race. So I think I'm going to paste that in as something else that I ran. I also ran, and well, I won't fill that in just yet. So let's see what we got. We have the total number of COVID deaths for each racial ethnic group, 356,861 total. For white people across states, 391,000. For Black people across states, 130,000. But someone pointed out in office hours, and rightly so, that does not comport with the United States totals that we saw before. The United States totals we saw before were 195,000, almost 196,000 for white Americans across the US, 65,000 for Black Americans across the US, 3,896 for American Indian, Alaska Natives individuals across the US. So why are we getting something different when we look at totals? So the answer is, if we browse the data, the answer is that when we're doing the totals, we're adding up across all of the rows, and that includes the United States rows. The United States rows already have the totals for the whole country. So what we really need is to get rid of the United States rows in our totals. So we're going to go back to that dialog box. Let's see if we still have it open. Yep, it's still there. And this time we're going to add a restriction. We're going to say if race is not equal to United States. Oops, I didn't mean to run that just yet. If race is not equal to United States. So in Stata, not is an exclamation mark. So race not equal, we only need one equal sign because we have the not. So race exclamation mark equals, and United States goes in quotation marks because it's a string. And then we're going to submit. Oops, what did I do wrong? Oh, oops, sorry, that should be state. If state is not equal to United States. And if you caught that mistake ahead of me, good for you for paying attention. So now we get different estimates. Now for white Americans, we get 195,931. For Black Americans, 65,056. For American Indians, 3,896. Lo and behold, when we go back to our data browser, which is not open, so let's browse the data. That's exactly the totals that we see. We see 3,896 for American Indian, 65,056 for Black Americans, 195,931 for white Americans. So now they add up. So in order to make it work, we had to omit these rows that had the United States total, or else they would be included again in the total, thus doubling the totals. So that is an example of how we use the total command from the drop-down menu. So I'm going to say I also ran this and found that it calculated a sum of all cove death rows and tote death rows by race, but I had to omit race and state double equals United States. And I had to, how about I had to specify state not equal to United States in order to exclude US totals from the summations. So that's another thing that we learn. And I'm just bold-facing those because they specify some commands. But you don't have to boldface them in your homework. I'm just doing that as a clarification. So that is another way that we could find some facts that we learned. So from the total command, I learned that the total Black and white deaths were equal to the US totals. White and American Indian, Alaska Native deaths were equal to the US totals. Okay, so I just wrote in question 14 something else that I learned, but you only have to write one thing that you learned. You don't have to write all of these things. I'm just showing multiple examples of what you could explore in your exploration. It can be very, very simple. It doesn't have to be even as complex as what I just showed you. Okay, so now we're moving on to question 15. Question 15 is, let's say that you want to try to replicate this horizontal bar graph that we talked about in class, showing the disproportionality in COVID death rates by race and ethnicity across the US. And so these numbers pertain to US totals, and that's going to be important in the steps that we run next as we try to replicate this graph with the CDC data. And here we see that the metric is deaths per 100,000 people disaggregated by race or ethnicity. And so we see the number of deaths per 100,000 people, which in this graph is 137 for Black or African American, 123 for American Indian, and 108 for Hispanic or Latino, and 86 for white, meaning that the ratio is about, so the Black to white ratio would be 137 divided by 86, 137 divided by 86, which is saying about that about 1.6 Black Americans dies of COVID. The rate of death per individual for Black Americans is about 1.6 times that for white Americans. Okay, so we want to try to replicate this with the data that we have. And so one thing that we need, as we look at the data, we know that we don't have a deaths per 100,000 people variable, but, I think I just made that during office hours. So let's drop that momentarily. If we want to drop a variable, we type the word drop and we click the variable. I just made that variable during office hours, so it wouldn't have been there in the raw data. So we don't have a variable for deaths per 100,000 residents, but we do know the population, the size of each total population from census data, and we do know the number of COVID deaths for each row and the size of the total population for each row. So we could calculate deaths per 100,000 people, and that's the first thing that we would need to do if we were going to try to replicate this graph. So I'm just going to describe in words how I'd replicate the graph. And the first thing I do is create a variable representing deaths per 100,000 residents for each racial ethnic group in the US as a whole. Okay, the second thing I would do is I would then try to make a bar graph, a horizontal bar graph. Make horizontal bar graph showing the number of deaths per 100,000 residents for each racial ethnic group in the US as a whole. So those are essentially the two steps I would need to do. So in the next task, I have provided code that would show you how to do those things. So the code that I ask you to run is 3 lines of code. Generate cov_d per HK equals round 2 parentheses cov death over population 2019 close first parentheses times 100,000 comma 0.1 close outer parentheses. The next line is label var, which stands for variable, cov_d per HK. So that's the new variable that I'm generating in the previous command. And I'm going to label it in quotes, COVID deaths per 100,000 residents. And then finally, I will do a graph. I'll make a graph, a horizontal bar graph, graph H bar. And I'm going to graph the sums, the totals of COVID deaths per 100,000 people, cov_d per HK, but only if the state is the United States. Because if I do this for all of the rows of data, I will not capture the true number of COVID deaths. So I want this just for the United States because I'm trying to replicate this bar graph here, which refers to the entire United States. So I just need the rows that pertain to the whole United States, and I need them disaggregated by each racial ethnic group. So I need to do that disaggregated by race ethnicity. And that's where I get this after the comma. It says over, which means disaggregated by race. And then I have some aesthetic comments here that I want the bars to be sorted by the size of COVID death per HK. So, so that it goes in order of how many of the severity of the death rate, just like we see in this graph we're trying to replicate. We see it going in order from greatest to least. And I want it to be a descending order, not ascending, but going from greatest to least, which is descending order. So that's what I see happening in the bar graph. And I want the bars to be labeled. B label bar is I want to have the numbers, the actual numbers at the end of the graph. So the only thing that might be confusing here is that I want race to not equal 6. And that is because in this particular data set, for the United States as a whole, there is no race equals 6. So if I include race equals 6, I'm going to get a bar that is basically missing. I'm going to have an extra bar that is just a 0. So to get rid of that, I've got and race is not equal to 6. So if I run these 3 lines, I'm going to copy the lines. I'm going to bring them over here, close my data browser. I'm going to bring them over here and paste them in, and I'm going to run them. First, I'll run them one at a time so that you can see what happens. So first, I'm going to generate my new variable. Generate means I'm creating a new variable, and it's going to be called COVID-D per HK. And I see that I get a message, but it's not in red, so it's not a mistake. It's just telling me that when I made my new variable, that 62 of the rows in my data set had missing values. And that is because they were missing in either the number of deaths by COVID or the population size. If they're missing on one of these 2 things, the resulting variable is also missing. So I'm not going to worry too much about that because 62 is not that much out of 433 rows. So that's okay. Then I'm going to run the next line, which is the label. And that is, so I can first, let me scroll over here and show you that I've created this new variable with that line of code. And here it is. It's in my variables list as COVID deaths per HK, COVID-D per HK. And that is it's rounded to the nearest 10th, the number of COVID deaths per 100,000 people. It's COVID death divided by the total population, which would be a very small number, multiplied by 100,000, so that it's not just deaths per person, it's deaths per 100,000 people. And then rounded to the nearest 10th, to the nearest 0.1, and that's what this round thing is doing. So that's what I've created, but I need to give it a label. So the label variable command says label var COVID-D per HK, and I'm going to call it COVID deaths per 100,000 residents. I'm going to click enter, and as soon as I click enter, and I scroll back down in my variables list, I see that the label is now there. COVID deaths per 100,000 residents is now a label that applies to my new variable. And I can browse the data to make sure the new variable looks okay. So sure enough, COVID deaths per HK looks to be in the range of 0 to about 100 and something. Okay, so that sounds like I calculated it correctly based on the graph that we're trying to replicate, which is this graph right here, where again, the numbers range from 0 theoretically to about 137, 140. Okay, so let's go back to the data, and I still have to run my graph command. So now I'm going to run my graph hbar command and see what happens. And when we run a graph, sometimes there's a delay, although this one was created quite quickly. But I notice a few things. So I have a horizontal bar graph hbar. I have bar labels, B label, parentheses bar. So that's the lengths of the bars. I have it sorted descending by the size of COVID deaths per 100,000. My rows only pertain to the whole United States, not to all those other states. And I excluded race equals other because it does not have any data. Okay, so what I see is both similar to and different from the graph that is in the quiz question. For one thing, I see that American Indian Alaska Natives have the largest death rate in this particular graph, 160 per 100,000. For African Americans or Black residents, it's 158. For Hispanics, it's 128. And I also have the total row that is not in the graph I was trying to replicate. I could omit that if I wanted to. And then for white, I have 99. Native Alaskan Pacific Islander 70, Asian 64, and multi I have 6. So that's similar to and different. In my graph, Black would be the second category instead of the first, but you can certainly see that in the original graph, the death rates of Black and American Indians are the highest. And I also think that I still have a similar ratio of about 1.6. So 160 divided by 99.3 is going to be about 1.6. So the ratio of death rates of Black Americans, of 158, I should say, the ratio of deaths of Black Americans to white Americans is still about 1.6. So the numbers here are a bit higher, but the proportions are similar, and the differences can be due to a number of things, including how people's races and ethnicities are categorized in each data set. So this is the graph that I made, and the code that I used to make it, you already have that code because it was given to you in the question. So you won't be asked to paste the code. But the next question is, well, let me skip that question and talk about what similarities do we see, what differences did we see, and what are possible reasons for the differences. So similarities are similar ratios of death rates. For example, 1.6 ratio of Black to white death per 100K. And similar numbers on the whole. Differences, positions reversed for AIAN and Black, but figures are similar, and overall totals are higher in the graph. And then reasons, possible reasons would be different ways of classifying racial, ethnic groups in different data sets or in different data collection agencies. Also, different time periods when data were collected. So those are possible reasons that would merit potentially further exploration. Okay, so now let me scroll back up to question 16. What do we think each of these previous lines of code does? Okay, generate command yields new variable, the quotient of, new variable cov D per HK, which is COVID deaths per 100,000 rounded to nearest 10th. Okay, label command labels the variable, and graph H bar makes the bar graph, horizontal bar graph. For US row total rows. For US rows only, disaggregated by race and sorted in descending order with bar height labels. Okay, so those are essentially what those three commands do. And the point is to kind of look at the code and try to infer, based on running the code and thinking about the code, trying to infer what it does. And later in the course, of course, we'll learn how to write the code. We'll learn the syntax rules that you need in order to generate this code on your own. And the drop-down menus will help as you're getting familiar with the code and learning the code. Okay. So now we're at our final question, question 18. Try to make the same horizontal bar graph you just made, or as close as we can, this time using the graph bar dialog box. So we're going to go graphics bar chart. We'll need to choose options on the main tab, the categories tab, the bars tab, and optionally the if tab. And then we'll paste, after we get to our best graph, we'll paste our code here. So I'm going to show you, this took trial and error for me to do, but I'm going to show you how you would do this. So I'm going to go graphics, two-way graph, I'm sorry, bar chart. I want a bar graph. So I'm going to go graphics, bar chart, and I'm going to look at my code so that I can think about what do I need to include in all my options. The first thing is I'm doing a graph H bar. So I'm going to need a horizontal graph. I want summary statistics, but I don't want averages. I want totals. So I'm going to do graph of summary statistics. I don't want frequencies or percents because these are not categorical variables. This is deaths per 100,000 people. It's a continuous variable. So I want, instead of means, I want sum, which is a total. And I know that because look, right here in my code, it says parentheses sum. So I want graph of summary statistics. The particular summary statistic I want is sum. And I want it just for the variable COVID-D per HK, which is COVID deaths per 100,000. COVID-D per HK. And I could also find that on the drop down if I scroll down. Okay, but I'm not finished. I need some restrictions and some categories. First, categories. I need it to be over race. I need it to be over or disaggregated by race. So I go to the categories tab. I click group 1. For group 1, I want to select race. And then I need some things that go with the over command. I need it to be sorted in descending order on COVID deaths per HK. So I'm going to click properties that go with the disaggregation variable. Properties, and I want sort order. I do want it, this is going to be blank the first time you do it. Sort order, I want it to be sorted, not on COVID deaths, but on COVID deaths per HK. And I want it sorted in descending order. And let's see, is there anything else I need here? I don't think so. So I'm going to click accept. Then I'm going to go to my next tab, if and in. And I need this restricted, I need two restrictions. I need if state double equals United States and if race is not equal to 6. So I need state double equal, in quotes, United capital. Capitalization matters when you're dealing with quotes. United States. And then for and, I need the ampersand. I can't type the word and in Stata. In some software packages you can, but in Stata you have to use the ampersand. So I need state double equals United States and race not equals exclamation mark equals 6. And that is those are my restrictions, my ifs. Let's see if I've missed anything. Okay, I also need to address B label bar. So where am I going to find that? Not in weights. Options, maybe, but bars sounds promising. So for bars, I'm going to go label with bar height. That's what I need. B label bar, label with bar height, which in this case, because it's horizontal, it's actually a bar length, but Stata considers that a height. It just happens to be horizontal in this graph. Okay, so now we're going to click submit, which will keep the dialog box open just in case we messed up. We can always edit it. In fact, you can still, it will remember your preferences even if you close out the dialog box and come back, but we're going to keep it open by clicking submit instead of OK. And voila, it looks identical. let's minimize that and let's look at our code. It actually looks identical. So of course, that's because I've done this before. I wrote the question. That's why I was able to get it looking identical. If you didn't make it look identical, that's fine. My goal was for you to explore what all of those tabs did so that you could play around with it. Oops. I need to paste that into question 18 because it says paste here the Stata code generated from your best graph attempt, i.e. the closest graph generated by the code above. So I'm just going to paste the code that was generated when I ran, when I ran my dialog box. And because it already had all of those attributes, it's exactly the same as the other code. But yours may not be, and you don't have to keep going until you get it perfect. Just get it as close as you can and call it a day. So now let's go back to the quiz, and I believe we have finished everything. It's always a good idea to scroll up and make sure you answered all the questions. It's easy to miss a question, but also this button, the submit button, changes from gray to blue if you've answered all the questions. So now that it's blue, that tells me that we did answer all the questions. So we're going to submit the quiz, and then the answer key should provide, it's going to look weird because it's a preview quiz. Mine is a preview, not a real quiz. So I can't show you the answer key, but the correct answers will show up, and you should be able to scroll down and read the correct answers, and you should be able to go back and revisit them later too, so that you can get, more practice and remind yourself how you did things in previous assignments. So that is the end of the topic 1 data task and how you solve it. I hope that these 2 videos were helpful in reviewing your homework. And of course, I'm always open to other questions. So thank you for watching.